was with me a second ago. There we are. Good morning. Probably need this. If you will turn to Matthew chapter 13, again. So we are in our second installment of our series about the stories Jesus tells, talking about the wonderful, powerful parables of Jesus and the ways in which he uses these stories to affect the heart. See, a couple of people had asked me last week, well, it still isn't perfectly clear. Where's the process? Where's the step-by-step stuff I need to do in order to get this through? Which is an impulse I also have when I read through stories like this. Where's the instruction? Where's step 1, step 2, step 3 in reading this story so that in the end I can do the process? See, here is an interesting thing. William Barclay, who's a wonderful biblical scholar, writes about this mindset that Jesus is operating with. There's two big mindsets in Jesus' world. There is Hellenized thought, so Greek ways of thinking. This is highly philosophical. Have you ever talked with somebody who was a philosophic person or a philosophy major? Do they care about the conclusion? It's the journey, right? It's this long process. The argument is what matters as we go through. That's one element of the Greek ancient thought. The other is ancient Jewish thought, which is focused almost entirely on praxis. What is the practical element? Get me straight to that. Get me right to the point where I have an answer, something I can get a hold of, and I can do that. Let's cut all the extra stuff and just get straight down to that. Jesus' parables don't allow for either of those. He's not always super clear in his parables, is he? And he certainly is not giving a long-winded argument. Most of his parables can be delivered in 5 minutes or so, if that. See, Jesus is really focused on those who have ears listening. He says that phrase over and over and over again in his parables. If you have ears, let them hear. That is the challenge. Are we listening? And through the listening, are we allowing the message of the parables to get inside of our hearts and work on us? Because the message of the parables is that there are paragons, there are archetypes, there are different things. We are meant to find ourselves within the parables. So last week we talked about the seed on the path and the seed who fell among thorns, and some seed was good, it was on good soil. All this different stuff is that he wasn't just saying this to say, some people are going to be like this, some people are going to be like that. No, it was the question of my heart is like this soil or that soil. It's one of these. We find ourselves within it. What does it mean for me to be rocky soil? How is it that in my life I have been a rocky place for God's message, for God's goodness in my life? Or in what areas can I strive to be good soil, a place where God can find fertile ground to do his work? It's meant to make us think about ourselves, to think about the kingdom. It's designed to make us think, to think and find ourselves in it. So we are now in the wheat and the tares is what many call this. The wheat and the weeds is another. In this, you see actually what we're talking about. So wheat is on one side, and tares, that's what it was called, kind of. It's sort of a Middle English translation of the word weeds. Essentially, we're talking about something called false wheat is what it's called. In our ancestors, many of us, if you were from European stock, would call it darnel or darnel, which I was just telling Ken how I find that funny, that people are just concerned that darnel is all in the fields. And I knew a darnel, so I think of him out there. And are concerned about it. But look, do they look similar? At different stages, some people who really know what they're looking at will know the difference. But That's going to come into play here in a moment. So, let's read through these. It's going to actually skip from one spot to another, but we'll start with the actual recitation of the parable there in verse 24. So he put to them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. What kind of seed? Good seed. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slave said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, and but put the wheat into my barn." Do we have ears? Are we hearing? So, Jesus, again, will explain this parable, but we need to look, I think there is a big question that comes in here. They said, the slaves, they say, "Master, didn't you put good seed in your field?" Why is there so much of this then? Let me put this into other terms. I'm going to be straight with you. I am a lover of photography. A good photo can make a huge amount of difference. And for those of us that have no talent for painting or drawing or any of those sorts of things, it makes a difference, right? You can capture that moment. You didn't have to sit there with paint and brush, and then in the end somebody asks you, "Well, what is this?" Now, and that photos, to me, they are moments of you're capturing this moment that perhaps only you saw. And that you get to share that with other people, that around them, right, a picture that says 1,000 words, right? That there's stories that surround them. And I'm going to be straight with you. Some of these photos are sad. Many of them will be. And in fact, one will contain small amounts of blood. That's going to be towards the end, and I'll warn you before that happens. But when we talk about this, we recognize that God made a good world, right? Didn't He? He made a good world for us. And if you have not asked over the past 2 years, where then did all of these weeds come from? I don't know. You must have had a pretty cushy existence lately. Where then did all of this bad, all of this ill come from? So this is a woman sitting in the midst of the wreckage in Japan after the earthquake. You can see everything she ever knew, with anything within eye line, is destroyed. I can see nothing put together. These, by the way, are some of the most powerful images, not just by me, that I didn't take any of these actually, but that have been called some of the most powerful images ever taken. And I kept them to a certain level here. There's a woman, her brother had died in combat. There. Born only in 1985, that young man. There's a hand of a Rwandan orphan. This is what's called an angel flight. It returns brave men and women who died in combat overseas. I have a friend, he was one of the chaplains who was responsible for one of the bases that we fly back. Brave people who died in combat. This police officer just told this young man that his brother had been killed. And you can see him, that in almost any other circumstance this man would have seemed impenetrable. Tough, doesn't he? This is Sudan. You may have heard about him. In 2015, which is when this picture was taken, I believe in spring, he died. That's the rhino, by the way. He was the last northern white rhino male in the world. There were only 3 at the time. There are 2 currently alive, both females, and very old. Within 24 hours, I believe, of this picture, he passed away, leaving this species functionally extinct. Last year, 2022, 7 species were declared extinct. 7. And we're not talking about microbes or insects alone, birds, large mammals, including this. The reason that they are going extinct, of course, is for that thing growing out the front of his head. Sudan weighed probably 5,500 pounds. His horn weighed probably 8. It's still thought that we lose 2 rhinos every day that are killed for an 8-pound chunk of keratin. Look at your fingernail. That's the same substance. This is a bomb shelter. These are children and infants who are in the intensive care unit in Ukraine who during the initial strike were moved into the bomb shelters. And that today you still see them living under threat. These are people who dedicated their lives, by the way, and risked their lives to be with these kids. Kids don't do so great in the intensive care unit in general, but then you take all the stuff they needed, and you had to cram it down into the bomb shelters underground. Because for some reason, hospitals don't seem to be off limits. This is a young boy trying to pick up his alcoholic father off the street. In our country, and in fact the world, you have a child born in the next minute will have a 1 in 6 chance of being born into poverty. Roughly 1 in 6. That's about 1 per row, right, of us. Where then did all of these weeds come from? It's a legitimate question when we're asking this, when we see that as part of our world. Those are things that are happening across our globe and within our country. Where then did all of these weeds come from? Does the Master have an answer? Yes, before and after, which is really important to focus on. Is he responsible for the weeds? Did he go out into the field and just say, well, some are going to be weeds. May as well, they'll learn to deal with it. It'll be fine. No. An enemy has done this. An enemy came into the field. An enemy did this. We live in a world that is beset by an enemy, that is under siege. So then I suppose the question has to be for us, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? Have we been in those moments where we have looked at our lives and we feel like all we get is just more and more weeds? And we ask God, why is this happening? Well, we know why. We live in a world where sin is a problem, even for followers of Jesus, that we will be attacked from time to time. But also, God, what are you going to do about this? It's a worthy question. So let's look over, if you have a Bible like mine, it'll be just across the column, to verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. Let me actually talk about one thing really fast. One group that isn't identified really at the beginning is there's some people talking to the master. They're called what? The slaves, right? That's what my version will call them, is the slaves of the householder. What typically throughout the Bible have we seen the slaves called? In a non-metaphorical sense. Servants, but also us, right? Slaves of Christ. That's who we belong to. And they ask, the followers come in and say, hey, maybe we could go and take care of this. The householder says, though, no. Why? You'll hurt the wheat. And all of this seems very obvious. I see evil, I know evil when I see it. But I think there are three big reasons that the master says this. One is that darnel, to many people, will look identical to wheat. That they will struggle to identify the difference, and that there will be times in which they will just pull some other stuff up. Have you been out in your garden and something arose that you didn't put there? Maybe a lot. And for those of us that are more industrious, we get out what? Some of you will say gloves. The weed whacker, right? You're going to get that out, and all these little things that sprung up, we're going to take care of those. But lima beans, I don't care for those. Perhaps we could get rid of that as well. You see how we could indiscriminately just get rid of things we don't like in the process. We may not recognize what we're looking at. The other is, perhaps they are close together, and we pull it up, and what will come along with it? That in the action of trying to remove the tare, remove the weed, remove the darnel, is that we will in turn destroy the good thing that was nearby it in our attempt to do this. We may not recognize the thing. We may harm the things around it when we sit in this seat. So back to 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. This is typically a phrase that will be repeated before Jesus actually explains a parable. I've seen a small trend existing within this chapter. He goes into a place, and then his disciples approach him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man." That's the other name for Jesus, right? So we get an ID right there. Jesus. And so he is also then the householder. He answered, verse 38, "The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the weeds are the children of the evil one." So those who follow God, those that follow the evil one. Two sides. Now, we can, of course, read this through a predestinarian lens of saying, well, some people are just destined to be this way. Some people are born weeds and they'll die weeds, and that's about it. The thing I've seen repeatedly throughout parables and other things of Jesus is that we get to choose who we follow. We get to choose who we dedicate our life to. We get to choose, unlike in our real life, we didn't get to choose who our parents were, who our family were. We get to choose which family we want to be a part of, the family of God or the alternative. And that's a really important distinction as we reach forward. And the enemy who sowed them in the field is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. I find it interesting, Jesus gives such little time to the devil. I don't even like it that I have to capitalize his name on my documents, but that he doesn't seem to spend a lot of time with the origin of evil. He just says an enemy did this. That's what happened. The rest of it is then, what is God going to do about it? What is the Son of Man going to do about this? So, the harvest is the end of the age, the end of the world, right? And the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. And this is important to read. I think we need to reread it. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin. All of it. And all evildoers. That one hits me a little harder. Do you know people who don't know Jesus, or who haven't accepted him, or who have chosen a path that is, they've chosen which family they want to be a part of, and that breaks my heart. We get to choose, is the good news out of this. And also the greater news is that Jesus isn't saying, I'm going to come in and these people I don't like, those people I don't like, people who chose which side they're on. But also, all causes of evil. This is what God's going to do about this. It's out. It gets ripped away. Who then gets to decide the fate of the weeds? Who gets to decide their fate? Who is their ultimate judge? Jesus is. Is Jesus trustworthy enough for us to say, I trust you to be my judge? As he knows our hearts. Do I trust him enough to know then the hearts of the other people around me? The people I may think are weeds, but perhaps aren't. Or perhaps I have known wheat that was not wheat. By the way, when you know the difference really well between these two? One, first of all, the weed gets a little taller most of the time, and their heads look different. The head of wheat will look like wheat. A pretty nice little shaft, spear-like thing. The other will grow little tufts off. Darnel is terrible for you to eat. It can do very strange things to your mind, apparently. It's not good. You recognize them then by their fruits. One will bear fruit that is wheat, the other will not. That's the key difference. And that Jesus is the one who is best equipped to recognize what is in the heart. What is the fruit that is being born in the heart? Gary so wonderfully gave us the fruit of the Spirit, which is, by the way, is the proper word, not are, is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. All of these things are born in the heart through that. You know them by their fruits. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And here's the big kicker. Anyone with ears, listen. So, I'm going to hand you a little something here. What then is the responsibility? Because the Christian then is told, your job is not weeding. That's one of the first things. They step in and say, hey, Master, why don't I go out and I will take care of business here? I'll get rid of all this. And the Master says, no, because you're going to do harm in that. When I decide I get to be the judge, I get to be the one who judges the world, gets to judge the people around me, those sorts of things, it's going to hurt the people around me. It's going to hurt even the wheat. I have to let God then be the one who sets the things to right. And I have to trust that even in the midst of a world full of that chaos and more, that He is going to set things right again. That all the things that even cause evil, not even just the people who have chosen to do evil, but even the very things that have set in motion the desire to do the evil, is gone. Is that good news? So what do I do in the meantime? Well, the responsibility then is to bear fruit in keeping with righteousness, is what I see. To do justly and love mercy and walk humbly with my God. If I am walk humbly with God, it's going to be really hard to try and take His seat as judge of creation. I'll show you something here. So you know him. He is one of our patron saints as an Adventist, right? Desmond Doss, right there, the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. Saved so many people during a time in which it would have been so easy for him just to go back down the cliff and leave the whole battlefield alone. And yet time after time after time, he goes and rescues people. Even while wounded, there was a film made, and I was listening to one of the filmmakers talk about it. He said we couldn't actually talk about all the stuff that he did because it would sound like it wasn't real. There was a point in which he is on a stretcher, sees another person wounded, rolls off the stretcher, and says, "Take him instead." Is that someone who is focused on bearing fruit? Or someone who is concerned with trying to be the seat of judgment for the world? He gets to spend more time and energy on focusing on pouring out what God has given to him into the world. Trying to sit as the judge over all humanity is a big job, and that's why God gets to do it. And it's going to take a lot of time and life and joy out of your life and mine when we decide to sit on that throne. This is Mr. Rogers. You may not know, an ordained minister. And here, he is washing the feet of the man who plays the police officer, who is an African-American gentleman, during a time period, by the way, when black people were not allowed to swim in the same pool as white people. He's washing the feet while on public television. Is this bearing fruit? This woman, I'm sorry, I meant to give you the warning. This was it. There's some bleeding. This woman had attempted to commit suicide on the bus, and these people rushed to her and prevented her from doing any further harm to herself, and are at this moment dressing her wounds and getting her the help she needs. See, even in the midst of the evil, of the bad, the kingdom is not without its champions. These two surgeons, you can see the surgeon in the foreground and his assistant is there, slumped in the corner, had been giving this man surgery for 23 hours straight. He outlived both of the surgeons. "23 hours they stood there and diligently used their skills for this." Does anyone know what this is? It's a boat. Don't say boat. This, you eat the breakfast items that are named after this boat, especially as an Adventist. It's called the Morning Star. It was basically a missionary school that went into the Deep South and taught underprivileged people of all shades how to read, health. They reached into communities that were not entirely enthusiastic about teaching certain people how to read. And so when they would get run out of town, they had this beneficial thing of being able to just float on down the river. they had hard lives, this big old thing. But they were going out into communities that had little hope and little energy being poured into them, and they did the work of pouring out Jesus' love into places where it was not. I'm starting to see fruit. This last photo is just one I really like. If you recall the massive fires that were running through Australia, koalas live in the trees. And that's problematic. And they are not fast, very slow. And so they were basically just sitting there getting their paws burnt as they were holding on to these places, and no water nearby, because Australia, even in the best of times, is not, green during these places. So here is a firefighter. He is giving what little water he has to help out this koala. And it does remind me, Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you have done unto me, including a drink of water. I'm sure he was talking about more than just koalas. He was talking about the ways that we choose to love and pour out into each other. Life is hard. We live in a world that is tough. We have a term for this as Adventists, right? The great controversy, a battlefield here of people who need hope and need love, who need to hear the message of Jesus, who need it to be shown out to them in their lives. And I think it's easy to just look at those big giant things and say, well, I can't do anything about that. The earthquake is past, the fires are too far away. There is always opportunity to make a difference when we pour our efforts into the things God is actually calling us to be. We can bear fruit. The Spirit is highly invested in God's mission being fulfilled. Do you believe that? That God is actually invested in seeing that His mission in the world is fulfilled. And for some reason, He takes the risk of using people like me and like you to go out into this battlefield and to minister and to care and to love and to teach. Those are the things we're called to be. That's what makes wheat. And I think it's challenging. If you want to look at, you could just Google today the 100 most powerful images that we've ever taken. Many of them you'll have seen today, but that there are many that show us a picture of something that was from far away or a moment we would never have seen, that offers us a chance to be challenged, to minister, to care. And so I just want to pray for us as we close here, that we will be a people who care more about bearing fruit than about sitting in judgment. That would be the higher priority. That we would not attempt to take God's seat, and that we would trust more and more each and every day in the God who is coming and who is and will put everything to right again. That in the last chapters of the Bible we see that, don't we? The one who sits on the throne says, "Behold, I am making everything new." Everything. In the new heaven and the new earth, there will be no more sorrow or mourning or pain, no fires, no earthquakes, no more war, no more people weeping at the feet of tombs. That is what Jesus is coming to set us free from. And I'm wanting to challenge each one of us today and each and every day. Let's steal a few more people from the other side, shall we? Let's bolster up this end with more hope. a few more people who see a world of care and love, of hope in Jesus, of a new life that he provides. Let's rob a few of a side that wants them to live in despair and darkness. Do you think that's worth our time? That we can make a difference in this world, and that Jesus fills us with the power to do the things that he needs us to do. And with God, if God is for us, who then could be against us? You know what the answer is? Nobody. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you are for us. Lord, give us courage. There is much pain in our world, much strife. There are many things that there are to be afraid of and things that do not fit with your good world. Lord, help us to bear good fruit, to not attempt to steal your seat, to contentedly follow you in all things that we do. I thank you that you love us. Amen. Happy Sabbath, everybody.